Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am joined today by a special guest, Dan Helotie of the Kannapolis Cannonballers. Super excited to have my guy Dan on today. We've had Dan on before. Our listeners that know us well definitely have heard Dan talk before. He is the play-by-play voice of the Kannapolis Cannonballers. Does an excellent job down in Kanny, and he is here to talk all about the Kanny season. Single-A affiliate of the White Sox. We're excited. I did an episode earlier this week with Dylan Barnes where we talked about the upper levels, Charlotte and Birmingham primarily. I know the guys James and Ian have some previews with some of the play-by-play guys in Winston and I believe Birmingham as well. And I'm lucky enough to be able to have Dan on today to talk about the Kannapolis Cannonballers season. Before we dive into things, Dan, how are you? How's the off season? Ready for baseball season?
Oh yeah, off season treated me very well. Had a bit of a hectic off season over here. Adjusted to a full time position now with Kannapolis, so got started full time over here, doing a little bit of ticket sales as well as everything else that I had been doing. So jumping into that, been a lot of fun. Got that going in about December time frame. Got married in January, so that was a whirlwind. So yeah, that got done. And just been adjusting to the new life, quote unquote, and going from here, ready to go and just get baseball season going. I get to the point every year where it's like, man, I'm just ready for baseball season to get here and have all the off season nonsense done.
Yeah, no, I feel that, man. Congratulations again to you on your big off season in many ways, for sure.
Oh
And
yeah.
we're excited. It's a fun season. I know you have seen some of these players before and some you haven't, but this Kannapolis roster, for those on social media and those that keep up with the White Sox well, it is pretty freaking talented. This is going to be at least the beginning of the season. There's going to be some guys that go up, some guys that come up from Arizona, guys that go up from Kanny to Winston this year. But this roster on paper at the start of the season is pretty spectacular, honestly. There is some serious talent up and down the roster on both sides of the ball, honestly. But yesterday, you got a little bit of this kind of preview of it. The FutureSox Showdown yesterday between the Kannapolis Cannonballers and the Winston-Salem Dash. Whenever you see these inner squad type of things, right? They do it in spring training all the time. These guys are always playing each other. They're used to it. But for me, when I looked at the rosters, while Winston is high A, right, and Kanny's single A, there's a argument to be made that the Kannapolis roster, all things considered, has more talent than Winston right now, or just a little bit more higher end of the prospects. Right? I believe there's 7 guys in the FutureSox top 30 that are all in Kannapolis to start the season. I think it might be 8 actually. Now that I think about it, but there's a lot of talent throughout the roster. So what was it like for you yesterday to be able to kind of get this taste of guys you saw last year in Kanny that are in Winston now, guys that were already in Kanny, and all these new guys as well?
Yeah, number one thing that I took from last night and taking that all in was it was like a big family reunion. So many people all in one place like that. It was really cool just to catch up with guys who were here last year and guys that are moving forward in their careers who they're not going to be back in Kannapolis anytime soon. But getting that first taste of some of the guys that will have this season and whether they'll be here for a month time frame or they'll be here probably the entire season. It was really good to see kind of the development and how this team's going to gel early on. I will say that the lineup absolutely terrifies pitchers. Obviously Jake Bockenset got the start for Winston last night, and he was hit early on. The really powerful top of the lineup for Kannapolis showed up and showed out last night. I mean, your leadoff batter is Nick McLean, and then you have to go to Caleb Bonnemer, who really showed up and showed out last night. I was really impressed with Bonnemer's stuff. And then first inning, George Wolko, my God, probably one of the absolute craziest moonshots I've ever seen. At a baseball field. I've been watching baseball since I was 9 years old, and I don't think I've ever seen a home run like that. It sucks that it didn't come in a game that counted necessarily, but we'll see plenty of those this year, I'm sure. And then not even talking about guys like Braden Montgomery, who was in the lineup last night, about Casey Salke, and even guys that are further down in the lineup. Javier Mogollon made his first appearance here in North Carolina in a game scenario. So seeing guys like that, it was really cool. Really awesome to get this together and kind of organized. It was a good crowd last night, great energy, and it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun calling the game, and really got to kind of see how this team's going to gel early on, and I have high hopes.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. You kind of just teed it up there, so we might as well just dive into the offense as a whole there because like you said, the lineup is really impressive, top to bottom. You've got this really fun blend of these experienced college hitters, right? Like Brandon Montgomery acquired this offseason, and then McLean and Salke and these other guys that were drafted last year by the White Sox, right? You've got high end, experienced college hitters, and then you blend that with George Walkout and Caleb Bonnemer and Javier Mogollon, who are all 19 years old and all kind of have that, really high upside ceiling type of guys, right? So you've got this super, super fun blend. So the guys you saw last year, right? You were able to see, George last year. You got a little taste of, I think there was only a handful of returning hitters. Ryan Burroughs is back. Ronnie Hernandez is back. That's another guy who's been, familiar there as well. In addition to Mikey Kane, I think Calvin Harris was there. I think Calvin Harris is mostly Winston, but he was there for a bit. But yeah, you've got a good amount of returners, but then a lot of new guys as well. Starting in the infield. So we'll start there. Like I just mentioned, Ronnie Hernandez, Calvin Harris, and Jorge Corona that are going to be the catching guys. What are you seeing from a guy like Ronnie? Because he's a guy that was there last year, showed some good signs, and is still kind of, finding his way as a hitter, I think, in the offseason. It looks like he's leaned out a little bit this offseason. It looks like he's kind of trying to find the body and the feel for catching still.
Yeah, you set it up. Roney really took a lot of time this offseason and worked on his body, worked on kind of slimming up, gained some more muscle, lost a little bit of the weight. And I think that's something that he really prioritized this offseason. He comes back, he looks much leaner and looks kind of more of a smooth swing off the bat for sure. A lot of good stuff from Roney from what I've seen just early on here. Some good stuff. Jorge Corona is actually kind of really entertaining to watch. Again, not a guy that I knew too much about coming into the arrival of the guys here on Monday, but after reading what he's done at Louisiana Tech for so long, and then coming in here and guy that just looks the part. He looks like a really solid catcher and looks like a really solid backstop offensively and defensively. He showed up in a couple defensive drills over this week. And then Calvin Harris, a guy that was kind of muddled by injury last year, spent some time with Winston-Salem, but never really could stay on the field consistently in a healthy manner. We had him for the end of 23, and it was a lot of fun to have him. A really cool guy, really good bat, who's kind of known more for his bat. But I think the purpose of getting him down here in Kannapolis after, he spent last year mostly in Winston, but it's kind of the same thing with Calvin Harris and with Jordan Sprinkle, as guys that maybe they were in the lineup in Winston last year, maybe they weren't, but just getting a more consistent ABs. I think that if they're guys that are going to be in the lineup and you want to develop them to their full extent and their full capability, get them constant ABs. And Calvin Harris and Jordan Sprinkle have that ability to do that this year.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a big thing with Harris, right? I think you can get him more innings. He can rotate in there with Roney. And I think Sprinkle, like you going over to the infield, right? Like there's definitely, you've got that middle infield duo that I think, we've heard from Paul Yanish, who the White Sox director of player development, that the middle infield is going to be Bonnemer and Mogollons on most days, right? Because those are two guys the organization is very high on, right? But you've got that first base and third base kind of, I think, a lot of rotation there. I think you're going to get Sprinkle some innings there. You're going to get Mikey Kane some innings there. Ryan Burroughs is going to get some innings there. It's going to give a lot of guys the opportunity to kind of work in and out there. Going over to the infield as we transition there, when you first saw Caleb Bonnemer, did you believe he was 19 years old? Because I had a really hard time believing that when I met him at spring training this year.
I sure didn't. I sure did not. I was honestly kind of tripping myself on Tuesday when we were doing through media day and everything. I was like, "Are you sure you're 19? Like, really?" But no, definitely a guy that shows up as more physically mature and definitely carries himself really, really well for a 19-year-old. Very similar to George Wolko, a guy that is very mature for his age. No, very impressed with Bonnemer. And you talked about it in the infield. It's gonna be a lot of fun to see where these guys end up shaping out. It will be Bonnemer at short a lot. It'll be Mogollon at second a lot. But, last night you saw Bonnemer shift over to third and give Ryan Burroughs some time at short. And you'll see Mikey Kane in the corner infielders spots. I think Mikey Kane's really going to be a guy to watch early this year. A guy that I was impressed by quite a bit before he got into the injury bug last year. He had a bit of a back issue that kept him off the field. But I was really impressed with Mikey Kane. I thought he was a really good bat in the lineup and obviously can play those corner infield spots. But as we talked about, man, Caleb and Javier up the middle is going to be fun to watch this year. 19-year-olds, my goodness, they keep getting younger every year, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's impressive stuff. I like that you mentioned Kane there too, because this is a guy who was, he's still 23. I think that the White Sox fans, he was drafted in 2023, but he was drafted at a really young age. Actually, he had just turned 21 at the time of the draft. So this is a guy who's still pretty early in his development process, even though we haven't seen him get a ton of games under his belt, right? Only, 196 MLB or minor league at bats at this point, right? So a lot to still see there from a guy like Mikey Kane. If he's healthy, I think he's going to get a good amount of innings at third as well. Lyle Miller Green is the last infielder listed. He's still listed as a two-way player. We heard yesterday that he's not expecting to throw anytime soon, but is still keeping that in his kind of bag. I thought when he was drafted is more of a hitter for sure. I think that's what most people have thought, but he is still listed as a two-way. Is Lyle kind of the guy that's going to play just a combination of first and DH, do you think mostly? And what do you think are some of the things we could look from him this season coming off of his first year last year?
Yeah, I think definitely the priority is to see him a lot at first base, kind of get
Yeah.
him in a rhythm there because we had him at the end of last season and definitely felt like he didn't not fit in. I think is the wrong way to put it, but he never really got into a rhythm at first base. He kind of struggled in the times that he was there, and we had other bats at the end of last season that uh, were worth DHing over LMG. So I think this year is a good opportunity for him to get in that rhythm at first base and really just focus on playing that position. As far as two-weighing, TBD, we really don't know. In talking to him, he definitely wants to. That's just kind of the vibe I've gotten from him is that he wants to, but they've definitely the White Sox have definitely made that a priority for Lyle Miller Green to go out there and prioritize the bat, prioritize the first base defensive position, and just go out there and play your game. I think that's been the message for LMG in this offseason and leading up to this season.
Yeah, completely. The outfield, man, it might not be crazy to say this is the best outfield in minor league baseball in terms of like for the level of talent and
Oh,
the
it is.
depth too. Like,
It is.
I don't think that's even a bold statement. Honestly, it's pretty insane when you look at it. I mean, this is 4 top 30 prospects in the White Sox system, all in one outfield. There's 3 outfield spots, right? So this is where I was kind of interested. It was very fascinating for us to see that Casey Salke went to Kannapolis because this is a guy who was in Winston last year and had a pretty solid first season in Winston coming off the draft. I think at least part of what I read from this is this kind of layer of protection that the lineup adds for some of these young guys, right? For guys like Walkow and Bonnemer, they can't just be force-fed breaking balls because you've got these college hitters that are surrounding them now with a Salke, with a McLean, with a Montgomery, right? This outfield is going to be exceptional. What do you think? The assumption for me, and Nathan Archer as well, I should mention, as the 5th outfielder there, another guy from last year's draft, right? So with that level of talent there, I'm assuming the DH spot is going to be given to one of these guys pretty much every day because you got to get at bats for these outfielders.
Yeah, there's only so many at bats to go around the entire season while you're here. And I think part of why it's such a loaded outfield is, let's be real, really how much longer is Braden Montgomery going to be here?
Not long.
The kid's very talented. He's very advanced, and already just seeing what he's doing here in practice for the last couple of days, it's like you can see the eye popping talent for sure. Again, no real reason to rush him. Still going to get his first, minor league debuts here this weekend, and he's going to get his feet wet in the minor league game, but again, that talent's going to be there. He's not going to be here very long. We kind of already have accepted that here in Kannapolis. He'll be headed up to Winston soon, my guess. Wolko, again, 19, really wants to work on being more of a complete player. That's everything that I've talked to him this offseason and leading up to this season is he wants to be a complete player, wants to work on hard contact, not just lifting the ball out of the yard, which he fooled all of us last night. He obviously launched a ball in the right field that was probably 420 feet. So definitely a guy that is working on becoming more of a complete player. Salke, a guy that's going to take the time and come down here and pretty much just try to dominate at the plate. I think that it's going to be fun to watch and see what he does. Work on his all-around game. A guy that, to be honest, I wasn't paying too much attention to other affiliates late in last season because we had the playoffs. We were getting ready for that. So a guy that I hadn't seen too much of, but just what I was seeing here early on here, very impressed. Nate McLean. With what he's shown so far, I think is probably the most complete baseball player behind Braden Montgomery. I think he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. Really fun to watch. He's going to probably take a lot of left field looks this season. I think he'll be here for a little longer than Braden Montgomery, than maybe a Salke, but I think he's going to be a guy to watch this season. And Nathan Archer being the fifth outfielder on this team, it's crazy to me because he's a guy that in college he led the team in at bats, he led the team in games played. He's kind of that workhorse outfielder, but he's known for his ability to get on base, his speed. And somebody like that at the top of the order is oh so valuable. So instead of having Archer at the top of the order, you're going to have him in the bottom third of the order, batting eighth or ninth, and that's going to play value. It's not necessarily a demotion to see yourself go from the leadoff spot to the 9 hole if you're already batting with all these other guys in the lineup. So, regardless, definitely not a question the best outfield in minor league baseball right now. I was just at all baseball, but obviously we're not there yet. So definitely the best outfield in minor league baseball. And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's just going to be a case of who gets pulled first, and we'll see what moves are made.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I think Montgomery is going to be there for a limited amount of time, and honestly, I think Sauke could be the same if Sauke starts out hot. I think both those guys could be heading to Winston fairly soon in the season. I think George will be there for a while because just the age, not because he's not talented, but there's still, like you said, rounding out that game, keeping working through things, and also I think that the White Sox, him and Bonnemer, have become somewhat of a viewed as duo of these young, superstar high school guys, right? And like I think that there's some value in those guys being together and learning together, and him being with those other guys and Mocayon as well. And then you mentioned McLean, right? Who's just coming off. He had the injury stuff in college last year, so I think for him, it's just getting games in, right? He hasn't played significant real games since last April, I believe, before his injury, last May probably, right? So it's been a while for him, and I think that's the guy who just needs to keep getting reps. Does it seem like Braden, at least for the time being, and then when Braden were to go up, I think Archer would probably get those innings then. But does it seem like Braden is going to be the primary center fielder? Because that's the gauge that we've gotten so far, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of the gauge of what I've seen. You obviously want to give some center field looks probably to Archer, probably to even McLean. I could see McLean playing center.
Right.
So I think that's sort of the beauty of this outfield, squad is there's a lot of flexibility. I think George is pretty much limited to right. I don't see any shame in that necessarily though, because he plays a very solid right field. He's got a great arm for right field. But again, flexibility with the rest of these guys and being able to place them left, center, use the DH spot when necessary. I think that you'll see guys be able to utilize that. I think you'll see probably Sauke in the DH spot a lot. Just my guess from what I've seen. Last night we saw McLean in left, Montgomery center, Wolko in right. I think that's kind of going to be the primary rotation for these guys. But again, never know where we could see Archer, Sauke work in there.
Yeah, 100%. That sounds about right to me. And it's like you said, it's going to be a really fun outfield in general. All those guys will be great. And whoever gets pulled up first, whatever, there's still going to be plenty there. Like even if Braden Montgomery only spends 3 weeks in Kannapolis, right? Like you've still got 4 really good outfielders to follow up from there. So it's going to be an extremely fun group to watch. Heading over to the pitching side of things, I'm going to start with, there's a lot of draft guys, right? So there's a lot of these guys from last year's draft, and either whether it's undrafted guys or the draft picks from last year, like that is a large portion of this pitching staff and going to be probably a highlight of the pitching staff. But I got to start with the guy last night who I heard from everybody I know that was at that game last night. I heard nothing but very, very good things about Christian Opper. Christian Opper is a 2023 fifth rounder, pretty high draft pedigree, junior college guy, dealt with some on and off injuries, command issues, just trying to kind of work through his pitching last year when he was in Arizona. I talked to him in spring training and he said, this is the healthiest he's felt in a while. He feels better about his arsenal than he did in a long time. And he looks the part. He looked the part in Arizona. And from everything I heard, he definitely looked the part last night. What did you see from Christian Opper? And do you think he can kind of become one of the keys of this, pitching staff this season?
Yeah, so far I would say he's the ace. Just all things considered, just looking at what he's got. High 90s fastball, 97, 98 with ease. And it's not too much of a herky-jerky delivery where it's clunky. It's very smooth. It looks the part, again, as that kind of top arm. He's got that sweeper that he's been working with that has really been dominant. Not many guys were making contact on that last night. That's kind of the 1-2 punch he was working with last night, mainly in that game, was that high 90s fastball and the sweeper. And that's kind of what, in talking to him, that's his arsenal, 1-2 punch, and then he'll work that changeup in somewhere in there. So really, it's been fun to watch, at least, seeing him in drills and seeing him last night in the FutureSox Showdown. It was fun to watch. He's a guy that's got a really, kind of a live wire arm on the bump, and he brings high energy, and he's just an overall good dude. So going to be fun to watch Opper this year, and we'll see how long, again, he sticks around here.
Yeah, and he's still young too. Even as a guy who was drafted in 23 and just making it to Single-A now, he's still a pretty young guy because he was a junior college guy, so he didn't play all his years of college. Just overall, very impressive stuff from everything I've heard about him. And I think that him getting every rotation innings every week is going to be really big for his development. Right, this is a guy who hasn't thrown on a full regular weekly schedule yet. So I think for him, it's really going to be awesome to see him get every innings every week, full starts. See if he can build up towards those 5-6 inning starts every week, and see what goes from there. Because the arm talent, as you said, is very strong. I'm very excited to hear that the velo was up as high as it was yesterday too, because that is something that he flashed at times earlier on, but didn't at last year, at least from what I know, was not consistently in that upper 90s range. So that's exciting to hear as well. The rest of the rotation is going to be a mixture of some guys. I think Ricardo Brizuela was one of the starters there last year, and then you've got a handful of these draft guys: Mason Moore, Liam Paddock, Nick Pinto, Justin Sinibaldi. These are all 2024 draft guys who are all experienced college guys, which is going to be a fun blend then with a guy like Opper, Brizuela, who's an international guy, and then you've got all these college guys. What sticks out to you from that group of those potential starters that I mentioned, of those college draft guys, from what you saw last year in their brief stints or what you've seen so far this spring?
Yeah, you just kind of listed out basically our rotation there. I mean, we'll see a
Yeah,
guy like Nick Pinto who dominated at the end of last year here. I mean, he pitched a couple times at the end of last season and once in the playoffs. And man, Pinto looked the part of a really solid lefty starter. Going to be a lot of fun to watch and see what he can do. Really like Ricardo Brizuela. Showed up last year at the end of the season, kind of tail end, and really got roughed up his first start. But then after that, really saw him settle in and really look the part of a solid rotation pitcher. Not a guy that's going to blow you away with a velocity, but his stuff just kind of moves, and he just kind of has this knack for drawing weak ground balls. So kind of a guy that plays to that contact enough to where it's really not, it's not blow you away kind of stuff, but it's again just working through the counts and getting deep into counts, not losing that stamina, and then able to induce the weak ground balls. You'll see guys like Sinibaldi appear. You'll see guys like Gabriel Rodriguez appear. Saw a couple of them today during live ABs. During they had their last practice today before we
yeah,
ramp up tomorrow for the game. But got to see Gabriel Rodriguez and Sinibaldi toss, so that should be a lot of fun to see those two guys. Sinibaldi was here at the end of last year, and really see a guy that one guy that I'm looking forward to would probably be Sinibaldi, just to see if we can stretch him out. We saw him appear at the end of last season, only went 3 innings at a time. See if we can get him to 4 or 5, and really see again another lefty starter. It's going to be a lot of lefties out of this rotation,
yeah.
at least with Opper, Sinibaldi, and Nick Pinto. But we'll see who else works into the mix and see what first year pitching coach Jacob Doris can cook up.
Yeah, what did you see from Mason Moore last year? Because he only made, I think, 2 appearances for Kanny, but this is a guy that has had some pretty good pedigree at times in Kentucky, and is another one who I think should play into that rotation mix.
Oh yeah, no, he'll definitely be worked in. Made a couple of starts in the playoffs for us this past
Yeah,
season. The guy that looked the part again of that starter looked like he had been in a bunch of those high leverage situations out in Kentucky. He was their Friday night starter, so a guy with kind of that high ceiling, but struggled a little bit last year. I would say he got to kind of hit around a little bit, especially in the playoffs. He had made 2 starts and he ended up giving up really not much in the way of runs, other than in the last game of the season, when that game 3 in the championship, he did give up a 2-run homer. Really, other than that, not a guy that really looks out of his place. A guy that looks like he'll be solid for us here in the early portions of the season. I'll bring up the name Carlton Perkins as well. We'll see where he works in, because I think Perkins is going to kind of be that flexible arm for this
right.
squad, where he can make starts, but he can also work out of the pen. He did a little bit of both at the end of last year here as well. So we'll see what Carlton Perkins works into that mix, whether he's out of the pen or he's going to take the starts.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's another name as well. Additionally, some bullpen guys that I'm keeping an eye on. Both Pierce George and Blake Shepardson are 2 guys in that kind of that last year's draft class that have very high end stuff. George has been known to hit 102, 103. Shepherdson's been in the high 90s range as well. These are 2 guys that should be high leverage guys. Do you see those 2 being kind of back end potential options for this team?
Yeah, those 2 probably will be our back end guys. I would also work Jesus Mendez in there, just because Mendez
Yes.
had
Yeah.
some of that pedigree last year, our saves leader from last season, who's back. The big key with those 3, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier with some folks, is again just control and finding the zone, pounding the zone. Again, these guys have high fastballs. I mean, Pierce George is unreal. Ball just jumps out of his arm. But the big key is throwing strikes, finding the zone, and not being afraid to throw it at the same spot every time if you need. You got the stuff to do it. So the big key is again just control, command, and finding some of that live wire, that availability to find the high velo,
Yep.
and just find the zone. That's going to be the big key for those three. Out of the bullpen, we saw a couple guys last night that were impressive, and we'll continue to see how that works out. I mean, a guy that I was impressed with last night was Jack Young, ninth
Yeah.
rounder out of Iowa. Yeah, I mean, guy looked really good. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Aaron Combs, who again we lost with the
Yep.
trade to the Phillies, but I think Jack Young is another guy that we'll want to keep an eye on late in games. Obviously led Iowa in saves last year, and a guy that has that kind of knack for finding his way onto the mound late in games, and looked to be a pretty solid arm. So we'll see where else some of these guys work. Eric McAtee pitched a little bit last night, looked pretty good for a solid
Heard
inning
some
of
good
work.
things about him as well. Yeah.
Yeah, McAtee looks solid, and then Liam Paddock, big tall lefty
Yep.
from Gonzaga. I thought he looked sharp last night too. So we'll see how
Nice.
everybody works out, but should be a solid bullpen.
Have you?
Obviously, I think the storyline with this team going into the season is we know what the offense is going to do. The pitching staff's going to be the big question mark. It's going to be the big key to the team winning a
Yeah.
lot of games, and that's kind of the storyline going into the season is how can this pitching staff back up the absolutely unreal offense that this team's going to have.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a very good way to look at it in general. Have you gotten a chance to see Luis Reyes throw yet? This is a name that I honestly was not too familiar with. I knew he was in the DSL last year or the ACL last year, but by far the youngest pitcher on this team. There's Opera coming in at 20, almost 21, a bunch of 21-year-olds. Luis Reyes comes into Kanny at 19, expected to be out of that bullpen. I think they will be fairly limited in the amount of innings he throws, but I'm very curious to see what his innings look like coming into Single-A at 19.
Well, everybody that I've talked to says Luis Reyes is the grossest pitcher on this staff.
Mhm.
So if that leads to anything, we'll see how that goes. But everybody I've talked to says he is the grossest pitcher on this staff, and everyone says, yeah, Luis is going to be the guy. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes again early on. I was pretty impressed with Opera last night, so
Yeah.
we'll see how that works in. But I've heard nothing but very high praise for Luis Reyes, so we'll see how that goes. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of video on him or too much, so I think there's a lot of us are kind of curious to see what that looks like just because he is by far the youngest guy on the staff. So definitely excited to see what that looks like. We'll wrap on this. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but what's the vibe like with the coaching staff, right? A whole new vibes. You got Pat Leland going to Winston. Now you've got Chad Pinder in as the manager of this team. Like you said, there's, Doris is the new pitching coach. Darius Day comes in as the bench coach. There's a really fun new group of coaches that are taking over this year. So how's that been kind of just seeing the new coaches getting acclimated here in Kanny?
Yeah, Chad's great. I really have enjoyed having him here for the last couple of days, just getting started, getting into the rhythm here in Kannapolis. I've really enjoyed having him, and he's been easy to work with. Super nice guy. Local guy, again, just down the road in Matthews is where he calls home now here, about an hour south here at Kannapolis. So a guy that's, quote-unquote local. Really nice to have a guy like that, and man alive, really good coaching staff so far. Jacob Doris is awesome. Really high energy guy, not afraid to call his guys out and speak with a tone that gets the message across. But he's not necessarily your friend, but he's going to tell you what needs to be done in a loving way. That's kind of how he's not being a parent, but he's not being your friend. It's kind of a weird dynamic, but honestly, I really like it. Jacob Doris, obviously a guy that's been there, done that, a side armor in the Astros organization for a very long time. So we'll see how that goes. I've liked what I've seen from him so far. Darius has been awesome. Charlie Romero back again. Everybody loves Charlie Romero. There is not a single person in that clubhouse that does not like Charlie. So good to have him back. Obviously got Tilly De Leon back, our trainer. She's awesome. And Rodane DeLuce, who's coming over. This is his first year in baseball. He came over. He's our new performance coach. He is coming over from the football world. So he was with Northwestern last year, worked with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a long time. So, good times. Really good coaching staff, really solid group, and should be a lot of fun.
Love to hear it, Dan. We're excited for the season. I'll leave you on this. Are the Kannapolis Cannonballers returning to the playoffs this season and making another run at that championship?
Man, you're going to put me on the spot here. I'd say so. I'd say so. I think that,
good shot.
Yeah, I'd say so. It's going to either be the offense leads the way the first half, or we get a lot of push from the guys in the second half on the draft. Yeah. So I think it'll be either one of those. It'll either be this offense leads the way in the first half, or the second half, the draft guys show up and we get that push.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm on the same lines. Super excited to hear you call games all year. Excited to watch this team get to work. It's going to be a lot of fun. I will definitely be tuned in throughout the season. Appreciate you as always, Dan. Best of luck with the season, and let's go Cannonballers.
Let's go Ballers. Let's do it.